So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our coffee and conversation. My name is T. McClinty, and I get the humble privilege of serving as your vice chair and moderating this coffee conversation on Roundup. I'm excited that we have Representative Kristi Pursell and our Representative Rick Hansen, who will introduce themselves, and then we will kick off and have them talk about. I actually looked it up this morning. Like, how do you, is it paracrate? And it's paracrate. And I was trying to get the right pronunciation of it. But I'm looking forward to it. I think many of you probably know that I'm the executive director of Minnesota 350, and we are an environmental climate organization. But this is not our area of the environment. So I am looking forward to learning and hearing and asking questions. And so with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and kick it off to either one of you that want to introduce yourself. And Christy, you're a newer face to some of us, even though you've been doing amazing work. I just looked up. You're in 58A, correct? And that is, so tell us a little bit about that, how you got into office and the work that you do. And where's 58A?
Sure. Thank you so much, T. Great to see all of you here, and thanks to Representative Ryer for the invite. Um, District 58A is a little bit south of you all. So I am in Northfield, which is a blue dot in an otherwise red district. So um, Northfield is the biggest community in my district. I represent Northfield, Lonsdale, Dundas, half of New Prague. And the reason why I get to do this job as a DFLer is because there's two small liberal arts colleges in Northfield, both Carleton College and St. Olaf College. Um, so I am down here. I'm finishing up my uh, second time around here, my second biennium, and I'm gonna run for a third time. So I've just been doing this for 4 years, and I'm currently co-vice chair of the Environment Committee. My first term, I was vice chair of the Ag Committee because I really work in the intersection of agriculture and the environment, similar to Representative Hansen. Um, my family farmed for about 10 years, small scale, kind of local organic vegetables and then commercial cut flowers. And then I was executive director of a clean water nonprofit down here called Clean River Partners, formerly Cannon River Watershed Partnership. So my district includes 6 townships. So I'm the most rural DFLer. I identify as the last rural Dem in the House. Hopefully that will change after this year, certainly. But of course, because of the colleges, it's a little bit different. Uh, my town of 20,000 includes 5,000 college students, so it's a little different makeup than a lot of rural communities. But um, yes, I was invited here because I was one of the plaintiffs on a case against Roundup called Durnell v. Monsanto that we lost at the Supreme Court at the end of June. I also am a co-author on the bill to ban paraquat, which Representative Hansen heard in his committee there, and am the chief author of a bill to make um, a research fund in the state of Minnesota for Parkinson's disease, which is linked to use of paraquat, um, partnering with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So, yeah, I will defer to the chair who will introduce himself next. But I got to sign on as a plaintiff for that Supreme Court case. It's of course not how we wanted to go, is to lose to a multinational corporation, which we sort of anticipated was going to happen, but happy to talk about kind of the fallout of that Supreme Court
Well,
case.
before we get to Rick, I'm curious to know what was your standing to be a plaintiff? Did you suffer some injury, some harm, or somebody in your family?
Nope, it was so Durnell was the farmer who had won previously in Missouri, some damages for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but because the impacts of the Supreme Court case have to do with what we're able to legislate at the state level, they asked for state legislators who work on pesticide legislation, and basically, we can go further into it, but it's like we are not able to further legislate or further label or anything on these chemicals than what the federal government does. So they ask for state legislators to be plaintiffs because it basically takes away our ability to pass legislation to further protect Minnesotans in our case. There's a proposition in California, which was sort of the, Monsanto did not want to have to change their labeling for California. So this now sets precedent that we cannot preempt what the labeling is that the EPA approves.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought before we get deep into the legal aspect that we would do a little one-on-one because this is being recorded, and for those who are listening, a little bit more between paraquat, I'm going to say it wrong a few times, Paraquat and Roundup. And so, Representative Rick Hansen, I know you said you're Rick today, but just respectfully,
Yes.
I'll start off saying that. So, I've known Representative Rick Hansen way, way, way back in my early days of organizing, back in my SEIU days when before I even became an executive vice president with SEIU Healthcare Minnesota, Iowa, I was an organizer. So, that's how I met you. So, it's been a long time, long, long time. I'm so happy that you agreed to be here. And also, as you said, Christy, recognizing and giving some kudos to Representative Liz Ryer, who I was saying, I got to find a guest. And so this is a perfect, perfect conversation to have. And so, Representative Rick Hansen, I will turn it over to you. And after that,
Well,
I'll just say Rick.
thank you, and I'll try to be quick because we've got a lot to go over. My name's Rick Hansen. I am right now at my farm where my mother grew up in Harmony, Minnesota, right south of Niagara Cave. So if any of you visit the cave, let me know, and I'll give you a tour of Amish country here as well. Uh, I represent South St. Paul, a little bit of Inver Grove, Newport, St. Paul Park, Cottage Grove, and Grey Cloud Island Township. Uh, Prior to being elected a long time ago, I'm a vintage member. I was first elected in 2004 and used to represent Mendota Heights, West St. Paul, Mendota, Lilydale, and even a little bit of Egan back then. My background is I worked at the state agriculture department. I did the pesticide applicator licensing. So I did the testing and training for pesticide applicators, whether they were farmers or Chemlon or Orkin, all that. I did those programs, worked with my colleagues around the country and also with EPA back at that time. I'm going to give you just a little bit of kind of regulatory work because of that. Um, in the 1940s, when after the war, there was a chemical, pesticides started getting used. They were called economic poisons at that time. And in the 1960s, Silent Spring was written. The EPA was created in the 70s, and there was a law called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So I'm going to refer to pesticides. Pesticides are the generic term, whether it is an herbicide, something that kills plants, an insecticide, something that kills insects, a rodenticide, something that kills rodents, and a pesticide, something that kills fish. Um, Pesticide is a generic term used federally with FIFRA and then at the state level. FIFRA was meant to, it delegates authority to the states, but it was meant to be a floor, not a ceiling in terms of regulation. That states could do things because the whole country is different. Our agriculture is different, our water is different, we have different topography, different climates, etc. So, kind of a basic part of FIFRA is that the states could go greater, farther, do different things, different restrictions, different conditions in regulating pesticides. Uh, FIFRA has not been changed very much since the 1970s. It's still a very basic law. And essentially, what Monsanto versus Durnell did is said that, well, FIFRA is the law. It's if it's not in FIFRA, if the labeling that's established at so the labeling is done by EPA, where the chemical companies uh, submit their scientific data to show that not only efficacy in terms of does this pesticide do what it does, but what are its conditions in terms of its hazard to people or the environment. So The original legislation way back in the 40s and 50s was, does this do what it says it's going to do? Then with the EPA, what is the environmental impact? In the 80s, we started looking at groundwater impacts. After the initial 1970s, how is this impacting the person who is applying it? And so the labeling says on the label, and the basic thing is what's on the label is the law. So if the label says the applicator needs to put on gloves and goggles and a hazmat suit, you need to put on gloves and goggles and a hazmat suit. If the label says don't apply within 100 feet of a river, or lake, or a stream, you cannot apply within 100 feet of a river, lake, or stream. So those are the label being the law. The label, go ahead. The label also has information in terms of its hazard. So Roundup, which the active ingredient is glyphosate, has a warning label that says caution. So in terms, that caution label is in terms of the applicator. What's that effect on the applicator, the person who is applying it? Paraquat, which is also an herbicide. So Roundup is an herbicide. The activating ingredient is glyphosate. It essentially, its mode of action is it causes the plant to grow to death. It essentially speeds up the process and kills the plant. Paraquat has a label that says danger warning. It is extremely hazardous to apply. It is very dangerous for the applicator and thus for the environment as well. Paraquat is an old chemical. For those of you who are older, you may remember paraquat being in the news in the 1970s because the DEA used to use it to spray illegal cannabis farms in the 1970s, and people were smoking it and did not know it, and it caused great damage because it's a very toxic chemical. So we've known about paraquat is one of the most studied herbicides in the world. I'd probably say atrazine, which is also an herbicide, is another one. But Roundup's use is so massive in terms of millions of acres of crops are treated with Roundup. And for the last 20 to 25 years, crops have been manipulated genetically to be Roundup resistant. So instead of cultivating crops like was done before, with uh, machinery and equipment going through and digging up the weeds. Corn and soybeans are sprayed with Roundup, and they're resistant to Roundup, so it kills everything else. Paraquat um, is used only on about 160,000 acres in Minnesota. It really wasn't used very much, but it's been coming back for use because certain weeds are becoming Roundup resistant. So if we go back to Jurassic Park and people talk about nature will find a way, there's going to be mutations, there's going to be something will be resistant, and all it takes is two, and they will create progeny that will be resistant. And then because they're resistant to the chemical, they make more, there's more and more and more. So then when the overuse of these chemicals causes more resistance. So then the farmers are bringing back the old chemistry that hadn't been used because the crops are not as resistant to them. So essentially, when you use, let's say you have 100 bugs, you had 100 bugs and you spray Raid on 100 bugs, and two of them are resistant to Raid, and they breed, and they're going to make babies that are resistant to Raid. When you start looking at the math on this, and when you apply Roundup over millions of acres, you get resistance for certain weeds. They adapt. Nature will find a way. So that's a little bit on the history of pesticide regulation, a little bit on um, the different chemicals we're talking about. I also want to reference that Kristi had mentioned neonicotinoids and seed treatment. Almost all of our corn seed is treated. So essentially, if you went and bought a bag of seed corn and it's pink or it's purple or it's green, there's a coating on it. And that coating includes a neonicotinoid, which is what it sounds like. It's a nicotine derivative pesticide. And by putting it on the seed and that plant grows, the neonicotinoid is brought into the seed and brought into the plant. So then it's expressed in the plant. So when a bug tries to eat that plant and it gets the neonicotinoid, or that particular chemical, it may kill it. Or in the case of bees, if a bee gets to pollen or comes in contact with small microbe, it doesn't take much. Remember, another kind of basic chemistry thing is the dose makes the poison. It doesn't take much of these things to have impacts on insects. Earlier with paraquat and Roundup, we were talking about herbicides. Now we're talking about an insecticide that's put on almost all the corn seed in the United States. The corn crop grows up, the corn is resistant to insects. The corn, when it's being planted, there are micro doses of neonicotinoids that go into the air. They settle on the flowers that are there in the spring. Bees come in contact with them. If it doesn't kill them outright, it is a it confuses them. It drugs them. They can't find their way back. They get confused. They get lost. They die. They're weakened. And if that doesn't happen, they're weakened where a parasite or lack of food or lack of habitat, other environmental conditions impact them because they're weakened. Kristi's been doing the bill to try to impact neonicotinoids. Like we've had bills in the past to put additional warning labels on bags of seed corn saying this seed treatment will impact pollinators. And we couldn't get that passed. What Monsanto versus Durnell would say is we couldn't do that now. We would not have the authority to do that. So I know that's a lot. I'm going to open it up to questions.
So I've got a couple that are related. First off, early in your presentation, you said that FIFRA is a floor, not a ceiling. If that's accurate, if I heard you right, then why couldn't a state add to the warning labels? And secondly, if you're prohibited from just dictating warning labels, isn't there a procedure under the Federal Administrative Procedures Act to petition the EPA to do what you want to do? Instead of doing it directly, you pass legislation that says the state of Minnesota or whoever wants to legislate by adding XYZ to the label. And in that sense, you have the ability to make FIFRA a floor, not a ceiling. Thoughts?
The Monsanto, that's the insidious nature of Monsanto v. Durnell, is that 50 plus years of standard are thrown out. Um, the question is, what can we do? It prevents the additional labeling on the label, but the question on bans or additional training, I'll go back to what I mentioned about certification and training. The certification and training was designed to demonstrate minimum competency. What we've seen the industry turn around in the last 50 years is to say, well, this is not minimum competency, it's proficiency, right? These are experts because they're certified and trained. There's a difference in that in terms of regulation. And that is essentially where Monsanto v. Durnell is going, is that these federal requirements, they demonstrate, that they're a shield. Look at what we've got. We have EPA is looking at this, and so the question of labeling and going farther, what can we do? And that's where next week or 2 weeks from now, uh, all of us belong to National Conference of State Legislatures, which is the organization and we have a resolution to request Congress to clarify if where FIFRA is at and what can be done with FIFRA. If the court is saying that FIFRA is the base, are there things that we can have delegated authority from the Congress to the states on certain specific things. Uh, so we're going to try to pass that. I'm expecting that will be a very hot debate because you have to remember that over half the states' legislatures are Republican trifectas. So the industry has a very strong toehold in many states as well. They're perfect. Many states are perfectly happy to say that the feds are the ceiling, not the floor.
I wonder if you're not overreading the Durnell decision. I recognize your fear about the ability to legislate and regulate. But the Durnell decision, if you treat it narrowly, was little more than a personal injury case for Monsanto's failure to warn that you can get cancer from Roundup. Which, Kristi, makes me wonder how you got to be a plaintiff, and whether you're really a plaintiff or whether you're an amicus in the court, because you and the legislators weren't injured. Maybe you had brought your own separate lawsuit to be able to do stuff. So the procedural posture
Yeah.
bugs me a little bit in how you got there.
And Ron, maybe you can tell them your background and all
Yeah,
this.
I'm
Yep.
about to. I'm about to.
Yep.
Um, let's just say that I litigated for 20 years about federal preemption, but in the medical device and pharmaceutical arena. And if you look at Durnell, you'll see that the FIFRA analysis generated out of the medical device and pharmaceutical litigation. I did that for 20 years. I represented
Mhm.
plaintiffs. So I lived, breathed, and died uh, federal preemption for a long time, and it
Yeah.
was a while ago, so I'm rusty. But nevertheless, I've got Durnell as a personal injury case, and you can't have a failure to warn claim because that is, in essence, adding to the label.
Mhm.
But the ability to regulate is not the same thing. And maybe what you're looking for is simply a declaration from Congress to say, Durnell is a very narrow case. We can still regulate for safety
Mhm.
purposes. We need buffer zones on our
Yeah.
watersheds. We can do that. FIFRA doesn't prevent us from doing stuff like that. So
Well,
is there an avenue for you?
I think you bring up a good point, and we're not going to stop with what we're doing. I mean, we're still going to push for state requirements because Minnesota has always led the way on things like this. We'll still push on a paraquat ban. Vermont did ban paraquat this year. They were the first state to do that. So, part of the fear, I think, and I'll just speak for myself here, is with the federal government under the Trump administration can take an opening and push a mile, right? And our court and there will be states that'll be happily go along with that because they don't want to. They're captured, and so part of what we want to do here is, at least in the NCSL level, so that's states working together, is to push so that if we do get a blue wave nationwide, that we can make these corrections. I don't expect much out of this Congress, but I expect more out of the next. And what I've learned is you have to break the ice a little bit to be ready. Uh, Otherwise, one of the tactics of industry is, we've never heard this before. You never brought this up. This wasn't a problem. So by organizing now, we can prepare. I don't know, Christy, if you want to say something on the
Yeah,
on Monsanto Beater
thank you. I
now.
was gonna, yeah.
Yes, and thanks, Ron. I did sign on to an amicus or amicus. So
Okay.
maybe I'm not a lawyer, so perhaps I'm using the uh, wrong words, but
Yeah.
I was one of,
Amicus makes sense. That makes
yeah.
sense.
So then and there was an organization, one of these, orgs that work with state legislators from across the country, who invited folks like me who, have done this sort of work at the state level to then sign on to say, depending on how the Supreme Court rules, it may impact my ability to do my job, which is to
Yeah.
legislate. And I think there is some question from what I have read from different people's readings of the Supreme Court case is exactly your point. It's like, well, how wide-ranging is this decision? And I think we kind of won't know that until we keep doing this
Until you
work. And
try it.
yeah, and I know that Chair Hansen is certainly on board with that. And you can't be a farmer without being pretty damn stubborn. And so I think to like keep trying and keep pushing because it's the right thing, and do exactly, what Rick said, which was like we gotta get caught trying. We gotta keep pushing, and pushing back because it's the right thing to do. And yeah, that's my kind of understanding is like, yes, we've had this Supreme Court decision that came at the end of June, and it's kind of unclear what those implications are necessarily.
If I'm not mistaken, you're on an advisory commission with the Attorney General, something to that effect?
So we
Where,
just wrapped up a year of the Attorney General had the Minnesota Attorney General, so this is Keith Ellison, had a group of folks together for the future of water. So it's a task force in the future of water, which has, of course, no um, ramifications. It's sort of like a discussion, and some recommendations came out of that process as well.
I wasn't sure if that was the group that signed on as an amicus.
Nope, that's just Minnesota focused. So the group, I mean, it was myself and state legislators from across the country who have tried to work on pesticide regulation who signed on to the amicus.
Do you have more to add to what Rick said about the various bills that you're working on?
I mean, I think so at the end of this biennium now, so we'll have to reintroduce bills, and um it will be interesting what the makeup of the Senate is once we have a Senator Liz Ryer. Hopefully that will help. We did not have support from our Senate colleagues to pass something as simple as like the paraquat ban. So hoping that perhaps with greater uh, greater margins, maybe there is some more protection that we can do that is not necessarily like have to do with the labeling per se, if that is where people are feeling squeamish. I'm not afraid to keep working on that sort of stuff, even with the Supreme Court decision. But to be able to do these other things like an outright ban of certain chemicals that we know lead to Parkinson's, um, and things like that. So I imagine that we will come back with all of these things. Representative Hansen has been introducing these sort of perennially, or every biennium for sure, just to make sure that it's in the conversation and to keep that moving forward. So it depends on, who has gavels and what kind of makeup the legislature has, and if we have a willing executive to sign something like that for the state too. So there's a lot of questions, but we'll certainly keep working in that area for sure.
T, back to you.
No, I was going to ask Kristi, is there anything else? I mean, Rick shared a lot. Is there anything else that you want to add that we should know?
No, I
Kristi?
defer I defer to the chair. I know my place here.
Well, I would just say the thing to remember about paraquat is that researchers use paraquat in the lab with animals to precipitate Parkinson's. The correlation with paraquat and Parkinson's is so strong that it's used to precipitate Parkinson's. Historically, Parkinson's was thought to be hereditary, and because of the massive infusion of research dollars to date with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, they found that about 20-21% of Parkinson's are hereditary. Parkinson's patients find it. So then it's environmental uh, stimuli. And so in the lab to show Parkinson's to use for research, they use paraquat. It's that strong. And what Kristi was being very diplomatic I'll be a little more blunt after doing this for 22 years. We will have Democrats. The reason we don't have a paraquat ban is Democrats.
Okay, I was going to
It's
ask why isn't there a
it's it's
paraquat
it's
ban?
it's rural Democrats, and that there has been, is, and probably always and will be, depending on who are elected as Democrats in the rural areas. Of There are people. All you have to do is say put the F in the DFL, and they will say no regulation of pesticides. No regulation can be done. We can't regulate anything because we've got to put the F in the DFL. Even when we have farmers who are saying we need to ban paraquat, the industry has a well-used playbook that some members will follow completely, and that's where even things like Monsanto v. Durnell, I can guarantee you, we will have members who will say, well, we're preempted by Monsanto v. Durnell, so we can't do this, and their colleagues may follow them. This is why it's so very important to elect Liz Ryer to the Senate. It's so very important to elect progressive people in the rural areas who aren't bound by nostalgia or easily captured by industry. How was that, Kristi? Was that better?
That was great. I was going to say not all rural Dems. I mean, you're
Right,
looking at the like one and
right.
only uh rural Dem who's like willing to stand up. Basically.
And they exclude you, right? They don't.
Right. I'm not a farmer because I'm too progressive because I'm a woman. I'm too young, which is wild because I'm middle-aged, but yeah.
So why
Well,
don't we have more
who's
rural
still using
Democrats?
paraquat?
Hmm?
Who's using paraquat?
Uh, Primarily sugar beet growers, but it's being used on cover crops. So it's not just sugar beets, but it's where cover crops are planted for soil erosion purposes and to prevent soil erosion. And because of that resistance to Roundup, they're using paraquat to kill all the everything to start over and plant in the spring.
So are
So
they
the
saying
cover crops,
Roundup is not strong enough and that's why they're sticking with paraquat?
the Roundup doesn't kill things anymore because some
Resistance.
weeds, is because of resistance.
Brian, you was going to say something,
Yeah,
sir.
I was moving into the political arena, and that is why don't we have more rural Democrats? Um, you would think that there are lots of farmers out there. You would think that there are lots of urban areas where there tend to be blue dots. Why don't we have more rural Democrats?
Chris, do you want to take that one? Or?
Oh gosh. No. Um,
She said no.
I mean, I think I think what we've seen from especially, my time in office is like since Trump and the MAGA movement is that it's really about identity politics. So, I went to a friend's house in Faribault last night for dinner, and the two houses on both sides of him have massive, massive, Trump flags and freedom and fuck but or buck fight and like it's an identity thing, and I think the MAGA especially has really capitalized on identity politics and really like being in an in group is so much more important than like policies that might help you and help your neighbors. And it's hard. It's hard to break through that. And I think for me, like I go and knock in my 6 townships, we have zero data from um, if there's data for these rural voters, it's from 2008. It is from the Al Franken campaign, who seems like it's the last time that the DFL cared about reaching rural voters. So I think it's a both and it's a perfect storm of our party really um, feeling like, oh, rural voters are a lost cause, um, and saying as much out loud and acting as such, as well as then the identity of rural communities and this like
So what did you
independence.
see when you knocked these no data doors?
I mean, uh, it was a real mixed bag. I mean, there's a woman who was like,
Rick,
"Oh, Kristi,
Rick is shaking his head.
I'm so glad for you, and I can't wait to vote for you and for Donald Trump." It's like,
What?
oh
Yeah.
yeah, oh
Yep.
Wow, both for you
people are
and yeah.
complicated. Yeah, and it's like I think for me, it's like that. I just gave a shit. Like I showed up on
Yep.
their door, and I don't think. Just because I show up doesn't mean that people are going to vote for me. People were still like super nice. There's a woman whose name was Kristi, spelled my same way. She like very slowly closed her door in my face. And right before, there's this much door left, and she said, "Red wave." And then like gently closed the door in my face. So like, I don't know if, how much of a difference it makes, but I have to think that showing up makes a difference because so many of those people are just like, wait, I know your face. Like, who are you? Because they've gotten the flyers and they have said no one has ever knocked my door, especially not the candidate. And so we have to show up places, even if it's a little harder, even if it's a little less like friendly. For me, that's just what democracy is like reaching out. And I will absolutely skip doors that have 14 Trump flags and don't tread on me because I'm probably by myself in a rural area knocking.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have gone to doors, with like the thin blue line flag, and they're two teachers who were, thrilled to talk to me. Their son is a police officer. So it's like it's more complicated. And the last example I'll give, just because you asked, Ron, if we just use the data about what kind of car people drive, what kind of magazines they subscribe to, like all this other kind of data that often gets amalgamated, and then we sort of make assumptions about people's political belief, would mean that I would not knock my local drag queen. Like Northfield has a local drag queen who's a hairdresser, who is a friend of mine, and he drives this big pickup truck and, rides his riding lawnmower. And like, so there's just the assumptions that we make about people, especially in greater Minnesota. I think our party needs to invest more in and it's less productive, like I don't get the numbers that you might if you are knocking in a more densely populated urban or suburban area, but to me it's worth it, because people feel left behind. So I think it's a combination of our party not showing up for rural places and this identity politics that really makes people feel part of an in-group.
Yeah.
That's
Rick, what are you
long
seeing?
answer.
I
Oh,
would.
great answer.
And Rick,
Great.
before you respond, I was going to ask, so then is the use of paraquat a rural issue?
I mean, it is a real issue. It's an everybody issue.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think
So then we in the urban are using Roundup or following the rules of the rural communities, mostly that we need to work on. Is that
and
what
I
I'm
think
hearing?
for me, it's like we also have to be protective of our rural communities, like the
Yeah.
way that Representative Hansen, my first term, I was on the ag committee. It's a lot of like, oh, well, let's protect air quality for the urban and suburban parts of Minnesota, but we'll just, let the rural places, oh, we'll just let them have terrible air quality and,
Yep.
kind of sacrifice them. And for me, that's not acceptable.
Right.
And that is, what a lot of folks might think, oh, that's what those folks want. And like, I call bullshit. Like, I think
Hmm.
everyone should be able to drink from their tap. And if you have a private well and you're in Southeast Minnesota, we know that you have a much higher chance to have higher nitrates and arsenic and manganese and all of these other things that you are then responsible for testing for, versus I'm on a city water and they have continual testing and they have to mix the water from our 5 different wells to make sure it is below these different standards. But my friends who farm 4 miles away and they're on a private well, oh, that all that responsibility is on them to test and then treat. So there is a lot of inequity around health, for our rural places. And so something like paraquat or something like, any of these pesticides impacts all of us, but I think, potentially has an outsized impact on more rural people.
Okay, thank you. And Rick, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah. Well, I think two parts. One, just that it's not just the rural areas.
Mhm.
I found in St. Paul Park and Newport that they hadn't been hit since the Franken campaign either, and that's very blue collar, working class areas that haven't been touched, and very similar to what Christie's saying is that I have Trump flags in St. Paul Park and Newport and South St. Paul. I go knocking, and there's guys having a beer in the garage, all wearing camouflage, and they say the same thing. You're the only one who stops by. We know you come by. You come by. I see you I see what you're doing. So I think showing up is really important, and there has to be an effort at doing that. I think kind of on the question of how do we get to this place, and uh, I think Christy would agree on this. Is we have a faction, and we have a very determined agricultural lobby. The ag chemical lobby, the ag implement lobby, the ag dealership lobby, the people who sell the chemicals use farmers to spread their message. And that if you are restricting pesticides, you're hurting farmers. Why do you hate farmers if you're restricting pesticides? When, again, go back to the original regulation was to protect the person who's applying it because they are exposed first and they may not be aware of the hazard that they are experiencing. That 30 years, 20 years later, they're going to get Parkinson's because of their exposure to paraquat. That correlation, they may not be aware of that. They're doing what they've always done.
Mm-hmm.
And that on the neonicotinoids, we can test the rainwater, we can test the snow. We did test at the beginning of the Walls administration. We tested deer spleens. We had deer hunters across the state send in the spleens of the deer they had, and they had neonicotinoids all over the state. Even in most northeastern Minnesota, in the pine trees, they had corn herbicide treatments in the spleens of the deer
Mm.
because this stuff moves in the air. And what Christy was referring to, we put odor restrictions on during the trifecta, but we had rural Dems who said we don't want that regulation, the old, uh, economic versus regulation, environmental regulation. So we have a strong faction, especially in the Senate, that says in order for us to win Greater Minnesota, not do it, we don't do what Christie's doing. We don't go out and talk to people. We sit and we listen to the lobbyist, and then they tell us we can't do anything. We have to allow these pollutants, otherwise we'll never win Greater Minnesota again. So you have an echo chamber of lobbyists and members who say that, and versus when you go, and I'm out in Greater Minnesota here, I right now there are people who are living on these farms that don't farm the farmland. The farmland got sold. The building site is 5 acres, 10 acres. They might have tattoos, blue hair, and piercings, and kids, and they're working remotely in Rochester, zooming in and maybe driving up to the clinic once a week. Our world is not what it was in 2006. It's different, and the vested interest always want to rely on nostalgia and memory and myth to support the status quo. And that's why it's so important to elect people who challenge the status quo and say we can have a better world. We can do things better. We hear this when we come out and we say we want to do things differently and better with your help. That's what Christie's doing. That's what Liz is doing at the door. That's what we're trying to do at the door is bring people with us and represent them because the myth and the lobbies do not represent the people. They represent interests. They have money, they have access, and they have power. But we can beat that. We've done it in the past, and we will beat it in again. And we will do it at the federal level as well. I'm just going to say one other thing. It is so important for us as Democrats when meeting with our gubernatorial and senatorial candidates and congressional candidates to say that the political idea that we must pollute in order to win is wrong.
Mm.
We have to do we have to do some regulations. That's the only thing that's ever worked. It's the only thing that works to actually reduce pollutants is regulation. I don't know,
Thank
Christy.
you. And I was going to ask Representative Ryer if she wanted to weigh in. When you are elected as our senator, what do you think about this issue? Next steps, but then also, Christy, I'll turn it back over to you, but I wanted to hear from Representative Ryer as well.
Thank you. And I also want to point out that Representative Vernick's here too, and she's been out in the rural areas a lot. So I'd rather be short and see what she's been hearing out there. From my point of view, it's such a powerful message to say, uh, I don't want you to be harmed. I don't want your neighbors to be harmed. Uh, that's why this is such an important ban. I have learned so much in this conversation, and I get a lot of emails about this. Um, the question that I kept thinking about though was um, in the Senate for the new candidates that we have, who will be our champions in the new batch? Like Mark Leisvold, I imagine, would be a champion. But are there people, and in the House, are there people we should be supporting who are going to be the, uh, along with me and others who are currently in, who else is going to fight against this force that is trying to go back to the good old days that weren't so good?
I mean, this is where like these sorts of conversations on the campaign trail really matter because I think especially brand new candidates who I hope Mark Legvold will be my senator and unseat Bill Liskey, who has been in that Senate seat since I got into this gig as well, who's a very far right conspiracy theorist, MAGA uh, person, very proudly. Um, but like Mark Legvold has, he farms, he was a teacher, he's in the military, but he's never legislated before. So it's really important, I'm having ongoing conversations with him. He's also having conversations with senators who are much more reticent to be protective of um, rural areas. So that's why these conversations beforehand will hopefully help shape those people as they come into office.
Representative Vernick, do you have anything to add? Would love to
Yeah,
hear you because I know you're always on the doors, always active, always busy in the community. So anything you like to weigh in on this topic?
yeah. Well, just a little bit about, you know, rural Dems and how like what has happened. How come we don't have a farmer in the, I mean, Rick and Christy, but um like both the representatives have said, I have gone to many, many places and we have not seen an elected official, Democrat, anybody here in 6, 8, 10, 12 years. You don't care about us. I think the messaging that they get is from their Republican counterpart. They don't get messaging from the DFL, so they don't even know what we are working on or what we've done. Or if they get it, it is from the Republicans who are like, look what we did. And you're like, but you voted against that bill. And healthcare is one of the biggest things. I mean, I was just in International Falls yesterday, the day before yesterday, and healthcare was the top issue on the doors. And in
Yeah.
International Falls, they have 5 doctors, and 4 of the 5 live out of state. So they fly the doctors in from the Dakotas and Missouri to fill those roles. And it's just they have felt very abandoned by the DFL. And I think
Mm.
being the co-chair of rural recruitment, Kristi, or sorry, Representative Pursell, Representative Hansen, being out there knocking, showing that we care about more than just the urban core is key, and it's going to take a long time.
Wow. I'm
I would.
sad to hear that they I'm sorry, Ron, were you going to say something? That
No, 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 no.
the rural community feel like the DFL It's not saying enough. But that's real. I like this real conversation. It's real talk. And it's something that we need to just be aware of. And thank you for all your work, Representative Purcell and Representative Hansen, in this topic. And I promised you yesterday when we talked that we would end on time. So I would like to give you any closing comments, anything that you want to say. And I think, Ron, you had a question before they do closing
No,
comments.
no, I'm
No?
I'm I'm
Okay.
good.
How would you like to use your last 2 minutes, Representative Purcell, and then I'll turn it over to Representative Hansen to wrap us up.
Well, just thank you. I mean, it does sometimes feel lonely out here in a, rural district, and I have felt really buoyed by my colleagues in the House, especially uh, Representative Vernig in particular, um, but also, the other folks on this call. And I think this um, crop of my caucus members, I think really like resonate. They understand the assignment for the most part, and um, I think that that shift in how we think about Minnesotans and how we think about our politics like is coming and is here. And so I'm really heartened by that and also like want to um show a different way that we can run and that we can win. And I think especially now like people are just so starved for like actual connection too, like we're not, none of us are in the same room as each other. And so door knocking is one of the only places I tell people like if you want to be reassured in your faith in humanity, knock doors. And people think that's crazy. People do not believe me. And I say like no, because even the people who disagree with me 90% of the time, they're still going to be nice. They're still going to be,
Yeah.
polite and kind. It's Minnesota. So just to have that like face-to-face human connection, I think is a thing that so many of us miss and don't have. And it's really powerful. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen this election necessarily, but it's like building up that trust and that relationship again is absolutely what I think will bring us back from the MAGA brink and really like just showing up for people and the way that Minnesota did this winter with Operation Metro Surge, which was highly active in my rural community. It's like it wasn't just a metro surge, it was statewide. Um, and so I think that that is important and not just the outcomes of elections, but the process of how we campaign and how we connect with people. And so having an issue like this to be able to talk about, it does impact every single one of us, even if it sort of is more of a rural issue. So
Yeah.
I thank you, Rep. Ryer, for the invite to come here, and thanks T for facilitating us and having this time to spend together. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Purcell. Thank you for being here. Representative Hansen?
Thank you, and I'll give a couple names following up that I think Dan Wilson is running for the House in Winona, very important to win that seat, and then Jack Hadeen is running for the Senate. He's a regenerative farmer. If you've seen the brand Featherstone Farms, that was his farm. So getting real, I want to go back to this idea that is constantly promoted that if we do environmental or labor or health and safety protections, that's why we're losing greater Minnesota. I don't believe that's why we're losing greater Minnesota. Um, I think it's the things that we've talked about of not showing up, not being there, and not actually promoting health, safety, environment, clean water, clean air, and labor standards. I think we have to show that we are for something. I've been in the House for 22 years. I've watched it transform. I think the Senate is where the House was 20 the Senate is where the House was 10, 12 years ago, and it's transforming. And we used to have these battles in the House. We don't have them as much anymore, even 4 or 6 years ago or 8 years ago. The Senate the legislature is constantly changing. It is moving. It reflects, sometimes lagging, but it will reflect who elects it. And so having new members like Liz in the Senate is going to make a difference because there are urban legislators that get captured by these same interests because maybe they're ambitious and they want to run for statewide office. So they believe the lobbies who tell them you cannot do the environmental protection or you'll lose in greater Minnesota. It really is important to talk about reality versus myth. I would encourage you to follow, even if you're not in our districts, to follow us on social media. We put things out on a variety of platforms, things that we're doing, places that we're going. It's really important to use the facts and get out and show what we're doing. I think it's important. And I like being on this journey with you. We're going to make a lot of change in the next couple of years, but we've got to get people elected to make it happen. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, representatives. Thank you for joining our coffee conversation. And with that, we will end the recording.